In this video, we're going to look at top-down and bottom-up processing, two things that are sometimes complex as concepts, but they're really beneficial for developing the receptive skills. So they're very important, and if we go deep into them, they might get simpler as we keep going. So let's start today, and let's look at what processing is really. Before we look at top-down and bottom-up processing, let's just focus on the word processing. What is it? It's taking information, analyzing it, and drawing conclusions or taking actions, okay? In reading and listening, when we talk about processing, we're talking about processing information, the information that we have from spoken source or the information that we have from a text. And processing this information is geared towards comprehending or general understanding of what is happening in order for us to respond, right? So what is bottom-up and top-down processing? They're both forms of processing texts, whether they're listening texts or reading texts, but they're ways to process a text to be able to get more understanding from them, to have better comprehension, to be able to respond. So let me start off with sort of an analogy, okay? Look at the picture in front of you, and what do you see? What is the subject in that picture? Okay, so you're probably thinking that that is a picture of a tree, right? Sure, it's in a forest and everything, but what you're looking at is a tree. Now let's compare that to this other picture. What do you see here? What is the subject? Sure, it's a bunch of trees, but the subject is not necessarily the trees, but rather the whole forest or that piece of the forest. So if we do an analogy and think of bottom-up and top-down processing, the tree, you're at the bottom looking up at one of the trees. And because you're looking at that tree, you're not focusing on the forest. You're only focusing on that one single element in front of you. You're on the bottom looking up at the tree. That's going to be like our association peg to what bottom-up processing is. You're looking at one single tree, one thing, you're on the bottom looking up. But if you go all the way to the top, and if you look at the top of the trees, what you're actually seeing is the big picture. You're seeing the whole forest, and it paints another picture completely different. You're not looking at any one tree, at any single tree, but you're actually looking at the whole picture. That is when you're at the top looking down. This would be our association peg of top-down processing. Now, to get deeper into what this means, I'm going to continue and let's look at bottom-up processing. It's really decoding. It's identifying individual sounds, identifying sentence stress and intonation, working out where words start and words end, recognizing clauses and phrases, recognizing chunks of language. But if you look at this, at no point here are we talking about understanding the story or the text or the general idea, or we're not looking at understanding, but we're more looking at the very specifics of what we're talking about. We're looking at the individual units, like we're looking at the individual trees within a text, right? And what are those trees? Those trees would be intonation or individual sounds if we're talking about speaking. And they would be letters and grammatical structures if we're looking at reading. Also, it's speaking, the grammatical structures. But we're looking at the units, but we're not necessarily looking at the whole story, right? So bottom-up processing starts from the text or the spoken words. It assumes that by working on a combination of different aspects of the written or spoken text, the learner can increase their ability to comprehend it. These might be very micro elements that you're focusing on, such as the sounds or grammatical characteristics, or they could be more macro, like looking at word meaning. The key idea in bottom-up is the decoding, is finding those details that have some sort of meaning, whether it's the letters that turn into words, the words that turn into meaning, but at no point are you trying to look at the story. You're just looking at these individual elements to try to get more information, and that information is later going to help you to understand the whole text. But you're fishing for this information that you have here, okay? So what kind of activities do we have with bottom-up and top-down processing? We have minimal pairs, basic filling in the blanks, looking at specific grammar structures. Let me give you an example. So you thought you were going to get rid of phonetics and you were never going to see phonetics again. But hey, here we go. We're looking at the difference of the f versus the th sound. If we're looking at this, this is a minimal pair exercise, and there is a big difference between fought and thought. And if I say the baby fought, has one meaning, and if I say the baby thought, has another meaning. But what we're doing here in this exercise is we're just focusing on that sound and looking at the difference of that sound, but at no point are we looking at the elements behind that create a story, or that create a general idea. We're just looking at these elements that give me some information for me to be able to interpret. So if I gave you a text, it's important, like a spoken text, it is important to be able to understand the difference between fought and thought, because that will give you a meaning, right? But at no point is the f or the th going to be the difference between you understanding why the child fought, right? It's just giving you a little piece of information right there. Let's look at another exercise. Let's look at this exercise. So for example, I give you a text, and this sentence is part of a text. But my questions for this part of the text are, what is the verb? Developed countries like those in Europe and North America waste around 650 million tons of food each year, and so do developing countries. So I'm asking here, what is the verb? If you guess waste is a verb, very good. What or who is doing the wasting? Well, developed countries are doing the wasting. Yes, very good. What do they waste? What do they waste? They waste food. Good. How could you rewrite this sentence in 2 sentences? Okay, so we've gotten to a point here where we're looking at the grammar, but are we looking at what's happening? Are we discussing the terrible idea of the waste and why are we wasting food as human beings? No, we're just looking at the grammar. Do I need to know anything else to be able to do this? Do I need to understand the story behind this? No, because we're just looking at the grammar. Granted, the grammar will provide some meaning for me to understand further, but I'm just mining details to be able to get more information, even though all that information, I'm not necessarily putting it together. The thing is, when we look at bottom-up and top-down processing, this is something that we do every day. When we're speaking, when we're reading, we mine details and then we put them together, right? But it's the mining of these details which is really the bottom-up processing. Okay, let's look at one more. So for example, we have this activity right here. So we're going to look at this exercise right here. So let's look at that. That's rain. Okay, so rain. So it's the verb raining. Very good. So today it's rainy. Very good. All right, so that is snow. So today it's snowy. And that would be definitely snow, and it's snowing, and so on and so forth, okay? So we've looked at this. So it's the wind, so it's windy, and the wind is blowing. Okay, right. So we've gone through this exercise, right? So students know that the grammar, we've taught the idea and the concepts of the vocabulary and the grammar. So we're building their schema here. Okay, so after this, what we're going to do is we are going to do the listening. All right, and you guys are going to do this listening. I'm going to play a minute of this listening, and all you need to do is when they mention one of the places that we have here, whether it's Seattle, Las Vegas, Chicago, Atlanta, or New York City, all you need to do is write the words that had to do with the weather. So these words: sunny, sunshine, shining, snowing, windy, wind.
Tape script 5.6. Listen to the weather forecast for the United States. Mark on the map what the weather will be like today.
Good morning. Here's a brief look at the weather for today in cities across the United States. Expect heavy snow in Chicago today, with up to 5 inches expected to fall. The high temperature today will only be 25 degrees. In the New York area and throughout the Northeast, it looks like rain, rain, and more rain. Heavy rain is expected with temperatures only getting up to about 37 degrees. In the South, the weather continues to be simply fantastic. If you live in Atlanta, you're going to have a beautiful day today, warm and sunny with plenty of blue skies. Temperatures today will get up to a warm 65 degrees.
So how did you do? Now, if we look at that listening, what you're doing is only looking at specific words. You're not looking at the whole story, because we don't care about the whole story. There's not a lot of story there anyways, but we're just looking at the words. Those words will be helpful for me to understand other things in general, but we're not looking at the general understanding of the text. We're looking at only the words. We're mining for that information, and that is what bottom-up processing means. It's looking at the individual trees. In this case was vocabulary words. In the previous case was grammar elements. In the previous case, it was pronunciation elements. But we're not looking at the general understanding. We're just mining for these details, which will help me create general understanding. But we're not looking at that. We're looking at the mining of details. That is bottom-up processing. So in the second part, we'll look at top-down processing, a couple of exercises, and a little bit more.